This is Senior Master Coordinator Bob Ferguson, and it is my tremendous pleasure tonight to invite my good friend and colleague of many years and certifiably smart lady, Nidra Sar, on to Shakti Talks tonight. So Nidra is an MSCNS, and tonight we're going to be talking about the relationship between gut health and the brain and all of the important things about that, and just exactly how important nutrition is in that. So Nidra, it is a delight having you with us, and take it away.
Excellent. Good evening, Bob. Thank you so much for inviting me to share some thoughts with you. Spend some time with everyone tonight. Dr. Brene Brown, the researcher, professor, and author of Daring Greatly, great book, she said, as I grow older, I realize that time is the most important and precious, unrenewable resource in our lives. In that light, I truly, truly thank everyone for sharing your precious time with me tonight. Well, I'd like to talk tonight about why nutrition matters, about our genes, our environment, and the effects of inflammation on our brain and gut, and why all this is so, so, so important. It is about health. To start with, it's just about health. So what is health? It's been said that we spend the first half of our life ruining our health in order to gain wealth, and the last half spending our wealth to regain our health. But when we look at a definition, it goes all the way back to Hippocrates, way, way back, probably around 350 BC. He said a wise person ought to realize that health is our most valuable possession and learn to treat our illnesses by our own judgment. We know our bodies better than anyone else, and sometimes we give over our power to others. The Oxford Dictionary of English before the 12th century, the Middle English named it health, and they defined it as the state of being free from illness or injury. You know, the sad thing is that that definition is found in most dictionaries today. Being free from illness or injury, that is not my definition of health. Let's see what the World Health Organization says. They say it's a state of complete physical, mental, or social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Well, they're on the right track, but they still haven't gone far enough. So now here it comes. This is our definition. All day energy. Yes, you may want to take a 20-minute break in the middle of the day just to center oneself, be mindful, but all the energy, getting up in the morning with great energy, going to bed tired, but still refreshed. Vigor and vitality. Isn't it fun to watch when you're in a restaurant particularly, or in a plane, airport terminal there, and just watching people move around? Which ones catch your eye? The ones that got vitality and vigor. Strength to be able to lift appropriate weight for your age. You know, the sad, sad thing is that too many women age 50 in this country, people who are grandmothers, cannot lift 12 to 15 pounds, about the weight of their grandchildren. They can't lift their grandbabies. I would have been so disappointed. The ability to move easily and participate in activities. When this is gone, and I've worked with so many men who were tennis players in their youth, but then through the standard American diet, perhaps not taking good care of themselves, they can't do it anymore, and they are just, this is a great loss. They feel so badly about it. The freedom from chronic conditions. This one's the one we're going to zero in on. Mental clarity and alertness, and of course, a zest for life. So, looking at all those, that is a definition of health that I think really defines what we all would want to look for. Now, Shaklee sponsored Landmark 2. If you haven't seen this particular graph, I believe it will be featured, I hope at least, at the global conference in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks. And what they've done here, it's almost like a negative sort of graph where they're showing prevalence of bad health outcomes. And if you will look at this, you'll see that the bottom crossbar shows 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. And if we're looking at the graph, we see that there's a red line that shows no supplements were used, a black line that says maybe one multivitamin was used, a gold or tan line where there were multiple supplements, and then a green line with Shaklee. For those of you who are on the phone, the interesting thing is that up to about age 50, it's pretty centered. They're pretty clumped together. At the age of 50 is where things start to make real turning points. And I always say, at this point, many of us had had some time to do some real damage to ourselves. We can't rely on what we were given from mom and dad and the good diet that they gave us as kids. This is where we started doing some major damage to ourselves. Interesting thing here again is that the graph that shows no supplements or a single multivitamin, that the prevalence of bad health outcomes for them is almost 30%. 30% of people, 25 to 30% of people have a bad health position by the time that they're 50. This goes on all the way through their lives, that the people who have used the Shaklee program have less bad health outcomes than those who have not. Now, of course, we know there are outliers. We know that there are people who suffer a heart attack or a stroke in their 40s, but this is the combination of the number of people. Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, I think, really was on target when she said Shaklee has the only nutritional products in the world that are clinically proven to help people live younger, longer, over 5, 10, 30, 50 years. But what my saying to people is, look, if you're in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, the decision you make today, you may feel perfectly fine. The decision you make today is going to affect your health in later years. And I would use a personal example. Our oldest daughter, Erin, was in medical school, and she had been using her Shaklee supplements since she was 12 years old. But then about her third year medical school, she said, "Mom, I'm good, I don't need anything." Okay. And I thought, uh-oh, we've lost her. And when she went for her internship, she was coming home for one of the holidays and said, "Mom, set me up with everything I need from Shaklee." Well, I'm pretty smart. I didn't say, "Why? What are you doing now? What's going on?" I waited until she got there and I showed her what she could take. And I said, "Just curious, why now?" And she said, "Mom, I have been in ICU and CCU, the coronary care unit." And she said, "There are so many people in there that are either your age and dad's age or younger, and they are in terrible, terrible shape. I don't want to be like them. I want to be like you. I don't see a great deal of difference when I take my Shaklee supplements." You remember, she was like 20, 22. And, but she said, "I want to be like you when I get to be your age." I felt as if she really got it and realized that the decisions that she was making back there in her mid-20s were going to affect her all of her life, and indeed they are. So the first human genome was sequenced the second week of April 2003. It seems like a long time ago, but that's only, 16 years ago? And what and how it has changed the world. We know now that our genome can tell us where our ancestors came from, which diseases we might avoid, which we might get, but genomics is still in its infancy. For instance, in the first 10 years of gene research, over $1 billion was spent looking for an autistic gene, a gene that was responsible for autism. What did they find? There is not a single gene for autism. There is a BRCA1 gene that can predict a woman's chance of breast cancer, and there's a gene that can show a higher risk of prostate cancer for men, but there is no autistic gene. But at the same time that they were spending $1 billion, you can see that that's a lot of money in my mind. They were spending $1 billion looking for a single gene for autism. How much did they spend looking at the interaction of environment and genes? 40 million. We call the interaction between environment and genes epigenetics, and that is the crossroad where environment meets genes. And yes, your genes can be actually changed in an instant, by a very major environmental challenge. It also can be changed, your genes can be changed over a period of time where you've had this assault on your whole genetic makeup. It can be changed over a period of time. What's my point? My point is that your DNA is not your destiny. You are your destiny. You're the one who's going to be determining whether you have health or not. So what turns those genes on or off? Diet, of course, we'll talk about that. Inflammation, toxic exposure, our worldview, our emotions. And I like to look at the cartoon figures over on the right here. Here's one fellow who's looking pretty angry. Another person who's got hearts where their eyes are, and you can tell that that person lives with gratitude, joy, and love. And then another person is just kind of la-da-da-da-da going along with things. You know that when you're angry, that things are happening in your body. And we'll talk a little more about that as we go forward, but it affects digestion, it affects mood, it affects everything. So our worldview, our emotions do give us an indication into that. Now, here we are at one of the cornerstones of our talk tonight, and that's about inflammation. I think it's now really shown that inflammation is at the root of most diseases. So in terms of heart disease, how would that manifest? Well, it would manifest by inflamed arteries and slower blood flow, leading to more heart disease. Cancer, inflammation gone crazy, cells that are proliferating where they shouldn't be. Diabetes, this is the long-term overweight with a chronic low-grade inflammation. In fact, we are now suspecting that Alzheimer's could be considered diabetes type 3. Is that linked with the same kinds of conditions that cause diabetes? In terms of rheumatoid arthritis, we understand about our joints being inflamed, accelerated aging. If you ever saw a picture of a person with chronic ulcerative colitis, it's just a fiery, raw picture of the colon, and seeing how this is so inflamed and so out of balance. The autoimmune conditions like asthma, lupus, fibromyalgia, all of these are inflamed, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and more, MS particularly. These are bodies on fire. And I think this graphic that shows the different areas of inflammation in our shoulder joints, in our elbows, and our wrists, and our whole digestive tract, our pelvis, and then our dear, wonderful brain that's just totally on fire. Where is the connection with all of this? Is there a connection between our gut and our brain? Let's take a look at that. Our gut is considered our second brain, and our messages travel back and forth. I'm not sure. I think it is becoming more common knowledge that 80 to 90% of all the feel-good hormone, serotonin, is made in our gut. And were you aware that now we're even looking at gut, heart, brain with messages? And when you can think about it in terms of the emotions affecting the brain, affecting the gut, everything is connected. One of my very wise mentors early on said, we must look at our body as a network of connected systems. We're not just a brain with a gut over here and a toe over here. You know yourself, when you slam your finger in the car door, your whole body is affected. You hurt all over. And that is just an indication, I think, of the fact that we've got to stop compartmentalizing our bodies into one section, our back or our lungs or our bowels or whatever. I always call, when people start talking in social conversations, when they start talking about all of their health issues, I kind of say to myself, uh-oh, here goes the organ recital again. And I know that they're hurting, and I try to be very patient and very understanding. Okay, so how can we take some of that serotonin from our gut and then transfer that feel-good hormone to our brain and then to someone else's brain? It's really simple. Next time that you are out shopping, say you're at the counter checking out from wherever, and you have a service rep there that's pretty with it, you know, smiles or just seems to be in a good situation. Maybe even if they're just sort of disinterested, I try to find something that I can connect with. And I will say, it has to be true. I will say, you have the most beautiful smile, or your eyes are really sparkly, or something saying, and you know exactly what happens. The big smile comes on the face. What's happening for them is they're getting this rush of serotonin. Somebody else is getting a rush of serotonin. It's me, because I've given that compliment. And interestingly, the studies are now showing that if someone else is in the locale, if they're in that, you know, conversational area and hear this going on, they also will get a transfer of serotonin. So do a good deed and go out and share some serotonin with other people. You'll be happy you did, they'll be happy you did, and a lot of other people will be happy too. The other thing that we got to know is that our gut bacteria is one of the most common modulators of inflammation in our body and our brain. So when we're looking at the relationship between gut bacteria and brain health, we want to understand that our brain is the most sensitive organ to inflammation, to that inflammatory response. It weighs about 3 pounds. It has over 100,000 miles of blood vessels. But what it's composed of is the fat you consume. Our brain runs on fat. It doesn't run on glucose like the rest of the body. It runs on fat. I truly feel that this horrendous amount of low fat kind of message that people were getting was not exactly helpful for the brain. But it's the type of fat. We'll talk about that. Then there's other areas that are going to be affecting the brain and inflammation. Mercury and lead lead to brain damage. One of the things you can do in terms of just your diet, it just struck me I could tell you this, and that is eat more sulfur-containing vegetables and fruits. Well, what contains sulfur? All of the cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kale, spinach, Swiss chard, all of those cruciferous vegetables will help to reduce the mercury and lead, because the sulfur actually surrounds that and pulls it away. The other thing is seafood salad. You can go into seaweed salad. Go into one of the Asian markets and ask them for a little container of seaweed salad, about 1/4 of a cup of that. And it is a taste you might need to get used to, but that's really helpful also in removing mercury and lead. The other thing, if you're not a vegetable eater, watermelon is a great sulfur-containing fruit. So again, helping to reduce toxins, that's really important. Smoking, we shouldn't be doing it. Absolutely not. And I'm so happy now that we aren't exposed to the smoking fumes that were prevalent just 20 years ago. All those toxic chemicals. I'm thrilled that we are seeing more news about Roundup and glyphosate and how damaging that is, not only to our environment, but to our bodies. What we need is more education. We need more exposure to these kinds of products that we can avoid. And if we continue to put the pressure on companies like Monsanto, perhaps at some point in time, it can be taken away. I know a town right near us has completely outlawed all chemicals. They're an oceanfront town. You can't buy Roundup in that town. You can't buy all the toxic chemicals. We go there to do our shopping for our organic fertilizers and our organic seeds and all of that kind of stuff. Asbestos, as we know, the toxins that came from there cause this disease called mesothelioma, which is basically a terminal diagnosis when someone receives that. It's a terrible disease. Household cleaners giving us respiratory challenges. We can do more about toxic exposure and reducing our inflammatory potential by reducing the toxins in our system. Now, I think this one, maybe some of you, we talked about emotions and how they can affect inflammation. Isn't this sound familiar? What you think you look, what you think you do, what you think you are. Dr. Shackley was such a wise man, a trendsetter, showing that our emotions do affect our actions and who we are. There are hundreds of studies now. There weren't any studies done up until about 10 years ago. Before that, I was reading something about studies in emotions and how they affected genes, and there was maybe 2 or 3 up until about 10 years ago. But now they've already found that there are 1,000 genes that can up or down regulate. Upregulate your immunity, in other words, make it more potential, or down regulate, depressing our immunity in the cell. Again, so many of us know about cortisol, the fight or flight hormone. But what I want to say is, are you aware that if you have chronic high cortisol, that can actually reduce muscle? It can reduce bone density. So muscle and bone density, muscle loss, sarcopenia it's called, bone density, osteoporosis, could be caused by chronic high cortisol. Interesting. Let's do some stress relief kinds of activities to help manage cortisol. But I put this one in red because high cortisol will actually increase skin wrinkling. And I know that people will do more to improve their look, their appearance sometimes, than they will to keep their muscle or improve their bone density. So we know that relaxation will increase DHEA, dehydroepiandrosterone, which is a naturally synthesized hormone in our body, primarily responsible for cell repair and communication hormone. So looking at all of these kinds of things, we want to understand that our attitude of gratitude and joy and love, our attitude of positive thinking, our connecting with other people so that we're not isolated in our own, little area. We have good social interactions. Those are so important for our muscles, our bone, our anti-aging skin. Looking now in terms of some of the other kinds of things that we can control, and that is that we're looking at nutrition. And the first thing that we do is we look to foods to avoid. Our ideal fasting blood sugar level should be about 80 to 95 milligrams per deciliter. At 105 to 110 milligrams per deciliter, this is not a great big increase. And I'm sorry to tell you that most doctors wouldn't even look at 105 to 110 as being high levels of blood sugar. But the New England Journal of Medicine in August 2013 said that at those levels of 105 to 110 milligrams, we can be looking at increased risk of dementia. Sugar, if there was only one thing that I could outlaw, it would be sugar, because that is like pouring gasoline into our system. And where else does sugar come from? It comes from refined carbohydrates, because those white bread foods, the prepared foods, the sweets, what will happen there is that they also will be looking at just raising those blood sugar levels. We want to cut our carbs to less than 60 to 80 grams per day. We hear this over and over again from Dr. Mark Hyman. Poor quality fats. Again, sugars, got to get rid of those. Refined carbohydrates, let's get rid of those. But our poor quality fats. And this is where we have gotten way overloaded with the omega-6s from corn and safflower and sunflower. Most prepared salad dressings. I'd like to put a plug in here. I have been making my own mayonnaise for a long period of time. It takes about 5 minutes in the blender. But just yesterday, I got some organic avocado oil. Oh my goodness, that is the best salad dressing. You just use the avocado oil, some lemon juice, a little bit of Dijon mustard, and egg, and away you go. It is phenomenal. It doesn't contain any preservatives or additives. It has all organic kinds of substances in it, and it tastes great, and it's less expensive. We're looking at poor quality fats from the kind of meats that we're finding in our supermarkets, our grain-fed meat, poultry, our farm-raised fish. These are things to stay away from. If you can only get grain-fed meats and poultry and fish, then I suggest that you really follow a vegetarian diet. I was at my son-in-law's father's ranch a few years back, and I saw a bag sitting outside the barn, and I read it, and I said, Fred, I said, this bag says estrogen on it. He said, yeah. And I said, what do you use a bag of estrogen for? He said, we feed that to the cows to help them gain weight faster. And I said, huh, you know, where I study is the fact that we're trying to tampen down the amount of estrogen that is in people's environment. They said, where I come from, I want to get my cows to market fatter than they were before. Okay. The fats that are found in processed foods are things we want to avoid. Gluten. And, you know, it's interesting that probably some 60% of us have a degree of gluten sensitivity. It may be that it isn't the gluten, it could be the glyphosate in the wheat that we're eating, the foods that we're eating that's causing it. But be it as it may, whatever the source is, gluten is the carrier of gluten sensitivity and all of the kinds of nasty conditions that come from that. All you have to do is Google gluten intolerance, and you will find just so many wonderful resources about what gluten can do in your body unchecked. Dairy, unless they're raw milk products, because dairy can affect many people in inflammatory conditions like arthritics and joint sufferers. Did you know that artificial sweeteners actually alter gut bacteria so that you can't process real sugar, and they increase appetite? Perhaps one of the multi-factors for the terrible rise in obesity is our use of artificial sweeteners. People thinking that this will be a good way for them to reduce some calories in their diet, and the problem is that all the studies that have been done show that those who eat artificial sweeteners will actually have a higher degree of weight gain than those who eat sugar. Alcohol in excess of 1 to 2 a day drinks. Monosodium glutamate, again, messes up your digestive system. And here's something you may or may not know. Chlorinated water, this is a recent study, is showing that chlorinated water will destroy gut bacteria. Well, many of us actually do drink filtered water at home, but what about when you go to a restaurant and you might get tap water, or you might be drinking iced tea or whatever? Perhaps a good question for your weight person is, do they filter the water here, or is the water chlorinated? Because if it is chlorinated, you might want to consider buying a bottle of bottled water. But chlorinated water destroying gut bacteria. Gut bacteria get destroyed, what happens? It regulates the degree of inflammation in your body and your brain. Okay, this is quick and easy. We all know to include 2 servings of fruit. I love berries. 5 to 9 servings of vegetables, primarily the ones above ground. the grass-fed meat and poultry. I've recently found a online meat service called ButcherBox. If anybody's interested in finding out more about that, just private messenger me and I'll tell you about my experience with that. It's been a terrific source of really, really quality meats. Wild-caught fish, cultured foods, all of the kefir, the sauerkraut, the fermented foods, these are really good for us. Extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, nuts and seeds, great for the brain, for good fats. What you might want to think about, get some organic coconut oil and put a teaspoon of it in your coffee in the morning. It actually smooths the taste of the coffee, but it also will give you a medium chain triglycerides, which are really, really good. And of course, our Shaklee protein shakes. So we're going to reduce our inflammation by improving our nutrition, reducing our toxic exposure, and managing our worldview. Well, here are some supplements, Vitalizer or LifeStrip. I won't go into these because if you are new to Shaklee, this is a great place for your Shaklee contact, your Shaklee distributor, to give you some information about this. But we love to start with either the Vitalizer or the LifeStrip, which is our multivitamin strip, our Life Shake or instant protein or energizing soy protein, best breakfast on the planet, our extra Omega Guard for DHA, which is critical for brain, vitamin D, Optiflora, and Vivex. And so, what a great article from AARP, Staying Sharp, 5 Pillars of Brain Health. And we'll kind of drill down through those. The Relax, Discover, Connect, Nourish, and Move. So my question for you, and I'm going to give you a little bit more science here, of these important strategies, every one of these 8 is very, very important. But there's one that, is kind of the lead in terms of being the most important. So let's give you a little background here. On your diet, we've already talked about nuts and olive oil, avocados. Eating a Mediterranean diet is so important, so check that one out. But the University of Singapore just released a study saying that drinking tea versus coffee will decrease your cognitive decline by 50%. That's pretty substantial, isn't it? And then managing your blood sugar. Wake Forest University said if you have a 1% increase in hemoglobin A1C, remember we said we want the blood sugar to be 85 to 105, but if you're over 3 months, if your hemoglobin A1C, that measure is up, your brain score will go down. We know that it's really important to have brain games and social contacts to keep our brain sharp. In terms of sleep, again, correcting any kind of sleep apnea, because a study out of Boston University said if you stop breathing, that will increase your cognitive impairment. And just think, with people who stop breathing many, many times at night, this is not good for our brain. We all know, too, that 8 hours of sleep is our best bet for a healthy brain, because between the 7th and 8th hour, you're laying down your memories and you're increasing your creativity for the next day. 2 new studies in just 2017 showed that vitamin C lowers oxidative stress. We also know another supplement that we have called Vivex that's wonderful for reducing oxidative stress. I always have my Vivex before my evening meal, because any fat that's coming in that meal can be actually helped to managed more efficiently by taking a teaspoon of the Vivex. Meditation, mindfulness, yoga, finding your Zen. There's so many studies about that. Exercise in terms of walking, and stress reduction, lower that cholesterol. So, all right, are you ready? Have you figured out which one it is? Walking, not running or biking, the most single important factor in brain health. I took a fabulous study seminar from Dr. Moss, head of VU Neurology Department, and then New Mexico University, the New Mexico Highlands University, again backed it up. The impact of your foot hitting the ground produces large pressure waves. Just think of it as you stomp down, these pressure waves that are increasing the flow of the blood to brain, bringing all the good nutrients to the brain. And all you have to do is 4 times a week to increase your brain volume and to reduce that mild cognitive impairment. How far should you go? That's up to you. But the interesting thing is that cycling doesn't have any beneficial effect since your foot doesn't contact the ground. There's no help for that. And they said that running, what's happening is your foot isn't hitting the ground long enough to produce those large pressure waves. So take this for what it is and realize that people are doing this. Many of you know quite a few of these ladies. They're all master coordinators, and they have dedicated their lives to increasing lifestyle, doing everything that they can to help build better health. And we say over 70? Do these people look like they're over 70? No way. Well, yes way. But I want you to look at something, and that is that all of them are kneeling. I suspect they're kneeling because they wanted to make sure that they got the Shackley sign. How many women over 70 would be kneeling on the floor? How many women over 70 could get up from kneeling on the floor? I bring you back to the bad health outcomes and say to you that the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. JFK said that in his inaugural address. And I say, if you wear out your body, where are you going to live?